The aftermath, justice and recognition. The courtroom at the Old Bailey buzzed with anticipation as the trial of Viktor Petrov and his accomplices began 3 months after their failed attack on Queen's Guard Thomas Mitchell. The case had captured international attention, not just for the audacity of the criminal's plan, but for the devastating effectiveness with which it had been thwarted. Legal experts from across Europe had come to observe what many considered a landmark case in the prosecution of crimes against state symbols. Viktor sat in the dock with his jaw still wired shut from the injuries Thomas had inflicted. The reconstructive surgery had been successful, but doctors warned that he would never speak clearly again. His once confident demeanor had been replaced by a hollow-eyed stare that suggested the psychological impact of his defeat had been even more devastating than the physical trauma. Marcus wheezed softly as he breathed, his damaged ribs serving as a constant reminder of the guard's precision strike. The former boxer's hands shook slightly, a condition that had developed after the incident and showed no signs of improvement. His career as an enforcer was over, ended by a single blow from a ceremonial rifle wielded by a man he had underestimated completely. Danny sat beside his co-defendants, wearing thick glasses to correct vision problems that had developed following his head injury. The tech expert who had once prided himself on his intelligence now struggled with basic cognitive functions and had difficulty following the court proceedings. His jamming device, which he had believed would give them a technological advantage, lay in an evidence bag as a monument to his miscalculation. Thomas took the witness stand with the same composed bearing he had displayed during the attack. Dressed in his dress uniform, complete with the medals he had earned during his military service, he presented a stark contrast to the broken men in the dock. His testimony was clear, precise, and delivered without emotion, allowing the facts to speak for themselves. "I identified the threat approximately 30 seconds before the attack commenced," Thomas explained to the prosecutor. The suspect's body language, positioning, and coordination indicated hostile intent. "I maintained my post while preparing for defensive action as per my training and standing orders." Defense attorneys attempted to portray the incident as excessive force used against men who posed no real danger to an armed soldier. This strategy backfired spectacularly when the prosecution introduced evidence of Viktor's organization and their previous crimes. The jury learned about kidnappings, armed robberies, and beatings that had left innocent victims traumatized and permanently injured. The prosecution's case was bolstered by expert testimony from military officials who explained the training and rules of engagement that governed Queen's Guards. Brigadier James Thompson, Thomas's former commanding officer from Afghanistan, testified about the Guard's exemplary service record and his reputation for measured responses to threats. Guardsman Mitchell served with distinction in some of the most dangerous regions of Afghanistan, the brigadier explained. He repeatedly demonstrated the ability to assess threats accurately and respond with appropriate force. His actions at St. James's Palace were entirely consistent with his training and the threat level presented by the attackers. Security footage from nearby buildings recovered despite Danny's jamming attempt provided clear evidence of the criminal's premeditation and aggressive intent. The video showed them approaching from multiple directions, weapons ready, with clear coordination that indicated a planned assault rather than a spontaneous encounter. The trial revealed the full scope of Viktor's criminal enterprise. Police had used intelligence gathered during the investigation to arrest dozens of associates and solve crimes dating back several years. Bank managers testified about robberies, shop owners described extortion schemes, and former victims identified their attackers from police lineups. Dr. Elizabeth Carter, a forensic psychologist, provided insight into Viktor's motivation for targeting the Queen's Guard. The defendant appears to have been driven by a desire for notoriety and a fundamental misunderstanding of the symbolic and practical role of the guards. He viewed them as targets for humiliation, rather than recognizing them as highly trained military personnel. The defense's attempts to characterize Thomas as excessively violent were undermined by his measured responses during cross-examination. When asked why he hadn't attempted to de-escalate the situation, Thomas replied simply, "Three armed men approaching my position with obvious hostile intent represented an immediate threat to royal property and potentially to members of the royal family. My duty was to neutralize that threat efficiently." Victor's criminal history was extensive and damaging. Interpol had provided evidence of similar crimes in other countries, suggesting that his organization had operated internationally. Victims from across Europe provided testimony via video link, describing how the group's methods had become increasingly bold and violent over the years. The judge, Sir Robert Hamilton, delivered his verdict with words that would be quoted in law journals for years to come. The defendants fundamentally misunderstood what they were attacking. They believed they were confronting a ceremonial figure when they were actually assaulting one of Britain's most elite military personnel. Their failure demonstrates both the effectiveness of our military training and the futility of attacking the institutions they were sworn to protect. Victor received 15 years in prison for assault, conspiracy, and his role in organizing the criminal enterprise. His previous convictions and the international scope of his organization resulted in recommendations against early parole. Marcus was sentenced to 12 years for assault and his role as the organization's enforcer. Danny received 10 years, with additional charges related to his technical expertise in facilitating the group's crimes. The sentences sent shock waves through London's criminal underground. The message was clear. Attacking symbols of British authority would result in swift defeat and severe punishment. Several criminal organizations reportedly disbanded following the trial, their members unwilling to risk confronting security forces that had proven their lethal effectiveness. Thomas returned to his duties with minimal fanfare, preferring to avoid the media attention that had followed the incident. His commanding officers noted his continued professionalism and his complete lack of interest in capitalizing on his newfound fame. He declined numerous interview requests and book deals, maintaining that he had simply done his job as trained. The Queen personally commended Thomas for his service, awarding him the Royal Victorian Medal for his protection of royal property and his exemplary conduct under attack. The private ceremony at Buckingham Palace was attended only by senior military officials and Thomas's family, reflecting his preference for privacy over publicity. Changes were implemented in security protocols following the incident, though specific details remained classified. Military experts noted that the attack had actually demonstrated the effectiveness of existing procedures rather than revealing vulnerabilities. The Guard's training was enhanced to include additional scenarios, but the fundamental approach remained unchanged. International media coverage focused on the professionalism and effectiveness of British security forces. Military attachés from allied nations requested briefings on the training methods that had produced such decisive results. The incident became a case study in military academies worldwide, illustrating how proper training and discipline could overcome numerical disadvantages. Victor's organization never recovered from the arrests that followed the failed attack. Law enforcement agencies across Europe used intelligence gathered during the investigation to dismantle similar criminal networks. The ambitious criminal who had sought to humiliate British institutions had instead provided the key to destroying years of criminal enterprise. Thomas continued his service as a Queen's Guard for 2 more years before accepting promotion to sergeant and a training position. His expertise in combat tactics and threat assessment made him invaluable in preparing the next generation of guards for potential encounters with criminals who might underestimate their capabilities. The failed attack became a cautionary tale that spread through criminal circles across London and beyond. The man in the red tunic and tall black hat was no longer seen as a tourist attraction or easy target, but as a symbol of the lethal professionalism that protected Britain's most treasured institutions. Viktor Petrov had wanted to demonstrate that nothing was sacred or safe from criminal attack. Instead, he had proven that some targets were more dangerous than any criminal could imagine.